Now, Havergal Brian is 96, and his story is a sad tale of neglect. In a very long life, he's composed dozens of symphonies, 5 operas, big choral works. These are just a few of his manuscripts lent to us by the BBC. Here's his symphony number 32 in A-flat, written when he was 92 years old. Though it's got the handwriting of a young man. And the truly astonishing thing is that only a handful of his compositions have ever been actually performed. This year, however, he was named Composer of the Year by the Composers Guild. So there are those now who believe that he is a neglected genius. Our film profile, directed by Barry Gavin, contains some substantial sections from Havergal Brian's music, so you can judge for yourselves. We've called our film about him The Unknown Warrior.
Havergal Brian, 10th Symphony, take 1.
Havergal Brian is 96 years old. He was born in 1876 and he's been composing all his life, even though he's been utterly ignored almost all the time, both by the musical profession and by the public. Now, in 1972, the very first commercial recording of any of his music is underway, supervised by a fellow composer and unflagging enthusiast, Robert Simpson.
I think it's so original. I think he's one of the most original composers that this country's ever produced, and that goes right back. I think he's a fantastically original composer. He's quite unpredictable. You never know exactly what's coming next, and it's always something stranger and more remarkable than you expect.
It's ironic that the orchestra for this recording session is not a professional group, but the Leicestershire School's Symphony Orchestra, most of them at least 80 years younger than the composer. Their conductor here is Eric Pinkett, the man responsible for creating the orchestra and its truly remarkable performance standards. Only a handful of Havergal Brian's compositions have ever been performed, and yet this doesn't seem to have discouraged him at all. Composing is what counts for him, and composing is always a lonely business. His musical language has a unique quality, untouched by time and fashion.
It's almost like someone in the dark who's beset by all kinds of things which he doesn't really understand, but he's beating them off in all directions, and the music is often very gruff and hard and terribly strong, but often, in a way, crude. I mean, rough as a bear's backside, as they say.
Shoreham, Sussex. By a sea he doesn't much care for, Havergal Brian lives quietly. At 96, he now feels too old to travel. And so one day last July, the children of the orchestra came down from Leicester to see him and to pay their respects. The composer and his young performers talked about music and life through the hot summer afternoon.
Actually, the beginning was, I was always mystified as a child. There's an old copy of The Messiah in the house, and I suppose it was my companion, but I couldn't understand anything of it, you see. I was transferred from one church school to another, from a village school to a town school. And in the town school, standards, I don't know what they are today, but the first, the second and the third standard sang in solfa. Fourth, fifth and sixth, staff notation, with solfa adapted to staff notation. A very simple method. Well, perhaps after the first lesson, the mystery of this music at home was no longer a mystery. I moved very quickly with it. And a few months afterwards, I went in a choir as a boy chorister. A few months after that, I commenced the violin. I was then 10.
Havergal Brian seems unperturbed by the noisy bustle of modern life. In fact, it was a very noisy afternoon down there in Shoreham. His memories go back to gentler days, to the beginnings of England's musical renaissance and his meeting with Edward Elgar.
Oh, Elgar, fascinating. Fascinating. He said to me, he was coming out of a box, and I was coming out of a box, and he put his hand on my shoulders. He said, "You know, Brian, I've never heard any music like that before." He said, you must come to Hereford. He said, "We'll go for long walks and throw pebbles in the Wye." Yes. I never heard any more of that.
The world of Elgar and the English choral tradition was a big influence on Brian's early pieces. This setting of the 23rd Psalm is typical of that period, and it's typical too of the bad luck which has haunted his career. Written in the 1900s, the score, like many others, was lost, and 40 years later he rewrote every note of it. This is its first performance for 70 years.
play tuba parts all the way through, both symphonies.
Always the tuba, which I regard mostly as the base of the horns. As a boy, I'd follow a brass band on the march, you know, until I was tired of it.
Would you?
Yeah.
I like it very much. It's got interesting heart parts in.
I write as I feel. Oh, it isn't with any desire to expand or do something unusual, or something out of the ordinary. Oh no, it just happens.
Well, the harmonies, they didn't seem to exist to start with, but as we went on, it all seemed to fall into place.
I work with a pencil and rubber, and if I do a good pencil sketch, I ink it in over the lead, you see, to save my writing out another one.
Very strange when we first had it. So once we got used to it, we were well away.
I think it's important to make a distinction when you get to this Leicestershire here to broaden quite markedly.
Also being recorded of his sessions is Havergal Brown's 10th symphony, written in the early 1950s. The conductor is James Loughran of the Halle Orchestra, making his first gramophone record. It's also his first working contact with Brown's music, and there are a lot of problems to sort out.
Anywhere, not even on these harps.
So these 4-tape piano are really just a placing of
just
the chord.
Just a touch. You know, it's one of those passages which is very characteristic of Brown, where you get enormous noise and then suddenly it's calm. It's like that part of you that is watching you when you're upset and isn't involved at all,
yes,
you know?
Yes.
It's absolutely quiet. And it's really also the calm before the storm.
For the storm,
so this must be quite a little shock when it comes. Most of his work's been written in the night, when everything's very quiet and dark. And somehow I think this comes out in the music. It has this atmosphere, this feeling of being completely cut off and detached and not bothered by anything. It's this heroic quality too which comes out, which is not about heroism, it is heroism. It's the work of a man who sits quietly on his own, turning out one work after another, regardless of whether they're played or noticed. I mean, he once said to me, his philosophy is nothing matters. And if that isn't stoical, I don't know what is.
This is the first time I really have come towards his music. It's always been, in the past few years, I've noticed the odd broadcast and heard it, and I never quite took it in. And even when I was asked to do the symphony, I read it through, and patches of it appealed to me very much. The difficulty was putting it all together. I couldn't quite see the continuity and the switches from one style to another, sometimes rather like as happens in Sibelius. But it didn't appeal to me just like that, as being like Sibelius. I just found it rather difficult to take in, and through working with it, I found it more and more challenging. So much so that, having now rehearsed it and worked and recorded with the orchestra, it's now gripped me tremendously. I'm looking at the second bar of 27.
Yes, I've got 6 beats in that bar and 6 beats in the next 3 bars.
Most of us have only got 4 beats.
In the last 40 years, none of Havergal Brian's music has been printed, let alone published, and sorting out the inevitable mistakes in the handwritten orchestral parts takes up an enormous amount of time and energy in the rehearsal.
So in other words, you've got 1, 1, 2, 3, then you play 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, rest, 4, 2, 3 you play. It's very confusing. So 26, please.
So with that particular problem ironed out, these young musicians can get on with the business of performing what is by any standards very difficult music. Havergal Brian has earned virtually nothing from his compositions. To make a living, he worked for music publishers and wrote articles for magazines. At least as a musical journalist, he could meet some of the great figures of 20th century music.
He apologised. Is that all right?
One of them was Arnold Schoenberg.
Didn't you write an article about Schoenberg long before anyone else in this country?
Probably.
I think you did.
You approved of his trend?
Son?
You approved of the trend in which he was moving?
Oh, yes, yes. Anything which was reaching out, you see, new, original, I always, if there's any value in it, yes. And Schoenberg was, yes.
Do you approve of where it's reached to now, Stockhausen?
Pardon?
You approve of Stockhausen and so on?
I haven't heard the music, no.
What did you do about Stravinsky and the writer's
You see, I could hear all these things, you see, but we haven't a radio. And we haven't a radio for the simple reason that we live in a flat. And one of the things that I'm perfectly settled on is that I won't be any a nuisance to anybody. So the only thing that is there, even my tape recorder I've lent, and the only thing that is in the lounge is a television. You don't get much music on that. It's a characteristic of my creative work that when I finish the work, I can very soon forget it. Very soon forget it. In fact, a lady, a very clever musician.
You live in a musical part of the world.
Oh, that's what they call a bulldozer.
You haven't written for one of those yet.
Due to, I don't know why, I can easily forget her work, very easily.
But when you started...
So much that a lady, that Dr. Simpson knows, Eve Barsh,
Yeah.
she said to me quite seriously one day, she said, if you heard any music played, do you think you'd be able to recognize any of yours?
Tactful.
We asked Havergal Brian whether out of all his compositions he had a personal favourite.
I like them all, you know, when I hear them. I think you'll enjoy, I was very greatly impressed with number 2. It's a powerful work of 4 movements, but there's no break between the first and second, nor the third and the fourth. And I call it man in his cosmic loneliness. And we have pianos in a scherzo, don't we?
2, yes.
16 horns in a scherzo.
Why do you feel you need 16 horns?
No, that's the same as I said the other day when I saw a photostat copy of a page of the number 10 with a thunder machine on it. You see, I began to wonder where I was at the time I was writing it.
What did you mean exactly by the loneliness of man that you were just talking about, connection with the Second Symphony?
Well, don't you think a man's a lonely fellow?
Since this symphony, his 21st, written when he was 81, Havergal Brian has composed 11 more symphonies. Only 2 have ever been performed, none published. Will they ever be? Who can tell? Now at 96, Havergal Brian has finally stopped composing, but not from disappointment.
It's not a psychological thing, it's a physical thing. In this case, I think it's the end.
And what about the future? Does he believe in life after death?
Not a bit.
Not a bit. Don't you miss music if you don't have anything to do with it or hear it?
Oh, not a bit. Because I was born a thinker. I've never lost. My mind's always going.
I sometimes think of him with the greatest affection and respect, you know, as the original awkward cuss raised to the level of genius. But the awkwardness, the cussedness, is part of the music. It's part of the character of the thing. I think his music is profoundly enigmatic, and we can see this at the end of the 10th Symphony. It's like staring at a sphinx. That brass chord near the end of the symphony is fascinating and terrifying, and at the same time calm. I used to call him the unknown warrior, because he was unknown for so long. And there's something that I still think is very true about that feeling, this sort of simple man battling against odds. Absolutely indomitable.
Actually, discouragement has never troubled me. No, not a bit. Oh, no. The only ambition that I've had is to create.